So Keshav, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, man. It's great to be here.
So you and I originally met a few years back, and at the time you had this mission, and I had the privilege of sort of assisting you with part of what you were looking to do then. And you were someone that inspired me back then. One of the things that I've been very fortunate about with the work that I do is that I get to choose the clients I like to work with, and you're someone that you had this mission, your vision. We just aligned. I actually remember I was having a day off. I think it was my birthday actually, and I thought, no, I wanted to have a call with you because I just knew that you were going to be someone that's just going to fill me with energy, talking about the stuff that you wanted to talk through at the time. And I've had the pleasure of witnessing your journey and seeing it, and you're a truly inspiring individual that knows his stuff, and I can't wait to share some of your wisdom with the people who are listening to this podcast. So first of all, thank you so much for coming and joining us.
Yeah, man, it's a great pleasure. And I guess I was kind of like your birthday present that day. So happy birthday again for that, man.
We were indeed. So let's just talk about personal development and your impact of what it is that you want to go out and do.
Well, that's a broad question, I suppose. And I have days where I think about the impact, and I have days where I think more about what is authentically kind of beating within me and feels quite just true to what I want to focus on and things that I want to talk about. One of the big things right now that I'm thinking a lot about is, I think, the bar for entry in the world of personal development, I'm sure you know this as well. There's so many podcasts out there. There's so many Instagram pages. There's so many YouTube channels. There's just constantly this massive wave of noise around personal development. And I think because all of it's easy to just create a post on Facebook or whatever. It's not all created equal. And a big thing for me right now is thinking about some of the unintended consequences of that, things like toxic positivity, some of the marketing messages that come out of, the personal development world. So for me, my impact on personal development is one, first and foremost, just to develop myself and to improve myself every single day. And secondly, to pass that wisdom on to others and to try and do it in a way where all of my content is fact checked. And I've really tried to provide as high quality as I can, because sometimes if the cost of sharing even remotely the wrong thing, it can have a massive damaging effect on so many people's lives, especially if you're online sharing stuff. But equally, if you get it right, the bar for success is high, and that's what something that I'm really passionate about right now is like really trying to model the behaviors and the kind of content and the kind of education at the end of the day that I want to see.
So let's talk about why though. Not why. Let's talk about the what. So what's the ultimate mission first of all for you? Because I mean, over 6 million people have watched your videos on YouTube, which is quite a sum. And there's a bigger mission at play. For you, it's not right. I just want to get to 10 million people. What's the ultimate goal that you're working towards with the work that you do in the personal development space?
Ultimately, it's something that I've realized more so in the last couple of years is I want to provide world-class educational content on the internet for free and remove the barriers to access that a lot of people have. When I started out, it was altruistic and selfish in that I wanted to start a business. I wanted to be a life coach and all those things. So I started making videos, and I also wanted to help people to find their purpose and feel less lost, stuck, and confused in life. Especially with some of the challenges that we face, things like anxiety, mental well-being, setting goals, being productive, overcoming procrastination. But more and more over time, I've seen how YouTube is specifically, or any content platform, but YouTube, the one I'm focused on, is a great equalizer so that, if I want to hire you as my coach, I might have to pay thousands of pounds to sit and work with you. And rightly, I should. I think that investment is really wise. But equally, I get emails from, people in Somalia, Kenya, India, even in the UK saying, I can't afford this, but I'm really getting value from the free stuff. So for me, the big driver, the big purpose is not really even a metric of reaching X number of people. It's more so just the quality education and enlightened ideas that I'm receiving, I want to share those and expose as many people as possible to those things. Jay Shetty, he talks about like making wisdom go viral. And I think at the beginning, I used to kind of think, that's kind of fluffy. Like, what does that even mean? But I really do understand what he's trying to get at there, and other content creators are trying to get at, where, a lot of things that I've learned about relationships, productivity, starting a business, even setting up an email newsletter, I've learned from using free tools like YouTube, Instagram, etc. So for me, the big mission is to leave a library and a legacy of content that anyone anywhere can access. And it's my free stuff is better than your paid stuff. And you can, 99% of it is free, and the stuff that people want to pay for, they can pay for. So for me, that's like the big driver. And it's just something that that's what I care deeply about, because, all you need is a mobile phone and an internet connection, and you can start reading Think and Grow Rich, or you can start learning about how to build more confidence.
I think what you said about high quality content is really interesting, because look, let's face it, if you're in business these days, particularly in the personal development space, we're kind of advised to create content, right? And create content and be out there and be able to build a profile and a brand. And I agree, there's definitely some stuff that gets said that I hear and I'm like, yeah, that's not strictly right. And it's not about whether it's being right or wrong, but what you said is it factually correct? Because everyone can have an opinion, everyone's entitled to an opinion, absolutely. But when there's just completely false information, it can be, like you said, very damaging. Particularly, I mean, if you think you've got a YouTube channel that's been listened to by 6 million people, now that 6 million people could have heard something you've said that was factually incorrect and could have had a detrimental impact. Whereas obviously the work that you've done, you've fact-checked it, you focus on it, and then obviously it has the positive impact. So I think that's a really interesting point of view that you take around wanting to make it high quality, but also admirable that you want to be able to have that ability of everyone to access that information regardless. So let's just talk about a few of the different topics, because we could talk about your one of the many things that I love about you is that you're very, very knowledgeable in lots of different subjects. So if people want to go on your YouTube channel, they can find out about trauma, breakup, toxic positivity, mental health, grief, goal setting, productivity, procrastination, confidence, self-doubt. There's lots of different areas that you're very, very knowledgeable in, and you share very practical information that will help people in all of those areas, right? In the appropriate parts on your website. But more recently, and I know that there's probably good reason for it, is that one of the areas you've been talking a lot more about is trauma, breakups, and toxic positivity. So I'd love for us to talk a little bit about those areas on the show today, maybe starting with toxic positivity. So for people that aren't aware of it, what is it? How do you know if you've been impacted by it? And most importantly, what should people be doing instead?
That's a great question, man. Basically, it's just the idea or the concept that there are so many messages about being positive, getting shit done, being a hustler, like all these things that are meant to serve people. And I think most of the time they do come from a very well-intentioned place. But if they're not tempered with a little bit of nuance and a little bit of what an NLP would call, a person's ecology, a bit of context, they can lead you to harm. So a positive message can become toxic. So an example of that might be, you're a 30-year-old woman working in a corporate job, and your boss is being really, horrible to you and quite abusive. And you're reading messages every day and internalizing this idea that, good things happen to good people, and what you attract into your life is what will happen. And so that message of something positive, because it's sent out in a generic way, it can be internalized by an individual in a way that doesn't really serve them. It can kind of make you feel like, oh, I'm attracting this into my life. Possibly you could say, okay, you could set some better boundaries. You could have a conversation with your boss about this. You could bring it up with your superiors. But basically it's this idea, this notion of placing too much of a burden on the individual and not giving an acknowledgement to the influence that our environment and basically all these other factors have on our lives. So for example, right now I really want to be more productive, but there are other factors in my life that are going on that mean that I can't work the same number of hours I normally would. And so I need to kind of look at it in context of, okay, what is the best I can do within the resources and the time that I have available to me. So that's a basic rundown of what we mean by toxic positivity. And you could just search the hashtag on YouTube or on there's a really good documentary by a guy called James Jani on YouTube. It's like an hour and a half, really world-class stuff like this. I don't know how it's on YouTube, it's on Netflix, but he goes through in detail a lot of the repeated messages that come. And I think one of the things that I like to think a lot about, and I've studied quite deeply over the last 2 years, is the impact of social hierarchies and structures on our personal development. So I'm a big believer that personal development happens in isolation and it's fulfilled in community. So that's to say, if I want to be productive, yes, I got to work on my habits and my routine, but I also have to acknowledge that I am a South Asian man living in Wembley or in London, and there are certain things or challenges or barriers that I might face that other people won't. That's not to say I want to use those as a prop or a kind of have a chip on my shoulder that I create a kind of victim mindset. But I think it's important to acknowledge that some people, including me, we have more unfair advantages than other people. As a straight male living in London with a supportive family, there are certain financial and social structures that support me, but equally there are also some that don't support me. Like I got stopped a few months ago by the police, and straight away you could tell that I was being racially profiled, and the set of questions, the things that they were asking me, it was very clear that it wasn't anything to do with who I was, what I was doing. It's just kind of making me feel that I was guilty before I'd even spoken. And if you were to put someone else in that context, you could argue about all these things, but basically one of the big things that I think we all need to consider, and I'm not saying that we should use this as a justification, but I'm saying consider is, how do outside factors affect me? And so that's what this whole conversation about toxic positivity is kind of trying to bring to light is, yes, hustle and work hard, and yes, have a positive attitude and have a growth mindset, but also acknowledge that there are also lots of things outside of your control. And so within the realm of that, what is it that you can do? Because I'm a big, as much as I have faced discrimination and racism and things like that in my life, and I still do to some extent, I always like to focus on what can I do within the scope of that. So, with that example I was giving you of being stopped by the police, I know in that situation, I can be articulate, I can be polite, I can try and disarm the situation so that the individual who's questioning me, I don't take it too personally and just say, excuse me, this is what I'm doing. These are the laws that I need to abide by. And I think what you're doing is wrong. And having that articulate conversation. So really focusing on what is the portion of responsibility that lies at my feet. And that's, you asked the question as well about like, how can someone know if they're affected by toxic positivity? And I think, to be honest, we're all affected by it. It's just how much we internalize some of these messages. I was looking at a tweet today from an author called James Clear, who I'm a big fan of. I'm sure you've heard of his work. And he was saying, when you follow someone online, you are making a choice about the future thoughts that you're going to have, because the content that person puts out, that's going to have an impact on what you think about, even for those 5 seconds or for that half a day or whatever. So think very carefully and curate the influence and the messages that you receive around you so that you get a kind of balanced view. And so one of the things I've been working on, especially I think a lot of people have since, all the stuff happened with Black Lives Matter and George Floyd last year, is to diversify my inputs. So the people that I'm following. So I'm not just hearing from one set of voices. And an example of how I've been trying to, as a content creator, just level that playing field a little bit more. Things like when most people recommend self-improvement books, the authors that are the most popular or are the most talked about are often white, middle-class, straight men from a certain background. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't listen to those people or that they don't have anything valid to say. But I'm saying it's also helpful to learn from people like Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, you know, like a Black woman, or learning from someone who's a Paralympian, or just people from different backgrounds, and trying to like diversify where you get your information, and in this case, you know, your personal development content from. One of the things that I've been looking at more and more this year is a lot of personal development ideas that are popular right now. They come from a very Western Eurocentric philosophy. Like if you go back to the roots, it's like, say, Socrates, Plato, Thomas Hobbes, etc. And I've been trying to actually go, well, why don't I know of any, you know, Indian personal development gurus from the 18th century? Because I'm sure they were there. You know, these ideas are timeless. So I've talked about a lot of things there and gone off on a lot of divergent tangents. But in a nutshell, toxic positivity is too much positivity that is affecting you in a toxic way. And I think the best measure for that is how you internally are impacted by that. Is it helping you, or is it hindering you? And I always say to clients, you know, I've got a few people who I coach who are going through breakups, and some of them have been through trauma, and they might be in a bit of a rush to heal and finish that process. And I'd always say to them, you know, focus on the conditions for healing to happen rather than the healing itself. And that's a good example of, you know, someone like that, if they're continually beating themselves up with this idea that, oh, I'm feeling really depressed and really down because I attracted this into my life. Maybe that's partly true, but also, you know, be kind and compassionate to yourself. So it's all about context, basically, and having a balance.
I think you've hit the nail on the head in those last two comments. To really sum up what you said, which you shared some really valuable insights there, is that have a balance and the context. Like you said, yes, most people, when they're sharing their opinions around positivity, it's coming from a place that they want to support you. But there is also a spectrum where it becomes toxic. You know, I mean, right now, a lot of us are reading about vaccinations. Right now, most vaccinations are actually getting a very small amount of the actual thing you're getting vaccinated from, right? So it's not the actual what's the word I'm thinking of? It's not the dosage.
Virus?
No, yeah. It's not the dosage that is bad for you. It's the volume of it, right? If you have too little, it's not going to do anything. If you have the right amount, it's going to help vaccinate you. If you have too much, it's going to kill you, right? So it's and it's very much the same when it comes to positivity or anything, really. And that's why I love the fact you said about balance, is looking at it, putting it into perspective, seeing it in that situation. Because you're right, there's so many people go, I need to think more positively, and they're beating themselves up for not thinking positively. But I'm a big believer in that any negative emotion is simply a signal to be thinking or acting differently, and it's either to think differently, get a different perspective and see it from a different point of view, or there is a practical element of we need to be doing something differently. And in my experience, from having had feelings of depression and been had suicidal thoughts and been in those real challenging times, it's like, well, when I drilled down to it in that moment, what was going on? And what was going on was that I was so focused about wanting to be positive, I'd created a fantasy around how my current actuality should be. So I was comparing my reality to a fantasy, and because it was so far away from how I thought life should be, because I was so adamant at one extreme of how it should be, that it was creating those feelings that I didn't want to feel. And it's only when I dissolve that and I bring myself back by getting different perspectives, seeing it as it is, not worse than it is, not better than it is, but just seeing it as it is that when I could then really start to do the work. So
I love that analogy, and I think that's so key, is you know, grounding yourself in the reality, accepting what is, and not trying to resist as well at the same time. In Buddhism, they call it the principle of anicca. So trying to find, you know, that middle ground between not getting lost in craving a feeling or wanting to be a certain way, or in a version of not wanting to feel that feeling, because it is what it is at the end of the day as well.
Exactly. And have you done Landmark?
I haven't, no, but it always comes up, and I've heard great things about it.
Yeah, it's not for everybody, but as is any personal development, there's lots of different things. You find your flavor, what's right for you. But for anyone that's thinking about doing the forum, I'm just about to, spoiler alert, I'm just going to tell you the summary of the forum. But they talk about that life is empty and meaningless. Nothing in life has any meaning except the meaning that you give it, and we have that choice. You said about responsibility and taking responsibility when you're in that situation where where things like you saying that you could be articulate and so on and so forth, is that responsibility is our ability to respond, right? And how we respond to anything is the meaning that we get to choose to give to that. So that's toxic positivity. But let's talk about two other things that I know is an area of work that you really specialize in. One of which is I don't know what order to do this in because I think they're linked. So I want us to talk about trauma and breakups, but I'm curious to know, how often do you find that when people go through breakups, it's as a result of past trauma? So maybe trauma is so how they're feeling about it is because of trauma from yesteryear that's then coming up, and there's lots of triggers, which is why they're maybe being affected more because of that breakup than what they have in the past. So I'll leave it to you. We can either talk about breakups first or trauma first, but if you feel that one sort of links into the other better, then we can. I
mean, I think it is a bit of both. I think I always, the analogy I give my clients is a little bit like a hot air balloon. The further up it goes into the atmosphere, the more pressure that builds upon that hot air balloon. And if there's a single hole or any kind of defect in that system, the pressure will get too much and it can't ascend any higher. And I know that's like quite a general metaphor or way of looking at it. But if I just look at my own experience, I started making videos and doing this coaching thing in 2012, 2013. And in that time, I've developed an audience, I've developed my mindset and my habits, and people look at me as someone who is, quite well put together and has got my life sorted. But equally, a couple of years ago, I went through a toxic relationship, which was really traumatic for me. And it was only in the aftermath of that I realized how toxic it had become. And if I look at the relationship I'm in now versus, my past relationships and how I showed up and the way I thought about them and what I thought was okay and wasn't okay and what was like a red flag or non-negotiable versus what wasn't, I can see how some of those are linked to past trauma, but also I don't want to put too much on, something that happened to me when I was 5. I think sometimes it's just you're leaning too much into forgiveness as a value. So for example, with this toxic breakup that I went through, I kept on explaining this person's behavior and trying to see the positive side. And I ended up excusing things that were not okay. And that was damaging and harming me quite physically as well. Like I was getting bald patches on my beard, in my hair. And I was quite stressed behind the scenes. But because stress is also chronic and it builds up, you don't notice it because you're just used to that day to day. But now I have a kind of new experience that I can relate to, and how much easier it is. It's like completely chalk and cheese. And I can see how when you do, I know it's a cliche, but when you do find the right person and you've developed yourself to a certain degree and you've got the communication, all those factors, it really is a lot more simple. And it's the same in business and friendships and stuff like that. I always say like the universe works in 3 ways. You get a feather, tap, and then a bus. So at first it's a kind of just a light little niggle, something kind of like drawing your attention. And then you get the tap, and that might be something a bit more clear. And then you got the bus. And I think in our culture as well, when we think of trauma, we think of abuse, for example. I didn't use these labels until I went to go and see a therapist, and they explained to me, this is the label, or this is the term for what you're describing here. And it was useful because it helped me to understand things and gave me a starting point for unpacking those emotions and that healing journey. But it also made me realize, someone's at the door, but it also made me realize that I completely lost track of what I was going to say. Hold on. I was talking
You're
about
talking about labels, therapists giving you labels.
Yeah, so I think one of the big things is language. When you can't articulate something, it's really difficult to feel heard and to feel seen and to feel understood. And as a human being, one of the most important things I think is belonging and connection and feeling like someone really understands you. And the thing with, breakups and trauma is you will, to a greater or lesser degree, you will relive a lot of the patterns that you saw in your childhood. And I think as your awareness increases, then you can start to do something about that. And that's the difference between an inherited belief and a discovered belief. And for me, what I notice in a lot of the people that I speak to, and also in my own experience, is that when we're in that phase of unconscious incompetence, there are a lot of dormant things happening beneath the surface that drive our behaviors. And so we don't have full control and understanding as to why we're making certain choices. But as we develop our understanding and we start to really get to know what those healthy behaviors look like, and also what we want and what our values are, then we can start to move in alignment with those things. And that's one of the things that I love about coaching and personal development as a whole. Is it's really, most relationship exercises really boil down to, what do you want in a partner? What kind of partner do you want to be? What are some of your non-negotiables? What are some of your things that like you want to do? What do you want this relationship to mean? Because like you said, things are meaningless, but we're the meaning making machines. And I think, with a little bit of introspection and a little bit of, in therapy, what they call the work, you can really start to change that internal inherited molding, which sometimes can scupper you. So then you're more aware of exactly what you want and what you're willing to tolerate. One of the big lessons for me in that past relationship was, just because you can explain something doesn't mean that you should excuse it. And that one piece of knowledge I'm so thankful for, because now I realize, I can explain a lot of things that people do. And I would, my value and my virtue, one of my strengths is being kind and forgiving and conscientious. It created this perfect storm where I was enabling some really toxic and harmful behaviors, because I was thinking, but this person's been through this and this happened in their childhood and all those things. But actually, when I sat down in therapy and I spoke about this and we did coaching on it and we did all the exercises, then I started to realize you can explain someone's behavior, but that doesn't therefore mean you have to excuse it. And so, because of things that I'd probably seen, not just in childhood, but in adolescence, in media, in movies, in TV, in the relationships around me, I'd internalize this idea that sometimes you just excuse things in relationships because that person's grumpy today, or that person's not feeling, whatever, with X reason. But actually, what is the standard I want to hold myself to, and I want to hold my partner to, and what do I expect? And if that isn't met, what are the consequences of that? And how can I set better boundaries around those things? So with sometimes breakups can actually be the thing that is the, what some people call as like the core wound. And that can take a really long time for people to heal. I've got, so many stories. I had a client once who went through, really difficult breakup, but it was like 5, 6, 7 years ago before we even started speaking about it. And it was only after 6 months of coaching this person that some of these things started to come up in our session. And so the first, 6 months was really just about me building that trust and that person feeling comfortable to go that deep and to explore some of those things. And then we started to see that it wasn't like she'd had a really great childhood, really loving parents, great family, all those things, because sometimes the cliche is you learn it when you're young. But actually she'd had this trauma and this breakup and hadn't healed, but had recovered. And that's what most people do, is when they experience trauma of any kind, they recover, but they don't heal. And the difference is, if you were to break your leg right now, you might not go to a physio. You might just you let it set, but then you walk with a bit of a limp and you have a muscular imbalance, and that you might even start exercising after that, and you might even start running, but that's all built on these cracked foundations because you haven't sorted out, the weak area in your ankle or something. Whereas healing, on the other hand, is you go and see a physio, you work on all these things, and you make sure that you really relearned the mobility and the flexibility that you needed in that joint so that it doesn't affect you going forwards. And that for me, with the breakup that I went through, but also that with a lot of my clients I work with, I say to them that the pain that isn't transformed is transmitted. So don't bleed on people who never cut you. That's like, you're not responsible for the wound. Yes. And it's really like messed up that someone did this to you. It's really unfair. Cool. But at the end of the day, what are you now going to do with that? Because the wound isn't your fault, but the healing, that is your responsibility, and you can control that. And that's why we're here. So let's focus on those things. Because I think, from that mindset, a lot more is possible.
Absolutely, for sure. So in terms of that, let's talk about some practical things. What is it that people can actually do if they have got some of this past trauma, whether it's relationship trauma or any other form of trauma that they might have had? And we're not talking, like you say, necessarily the physical trauma, but whatever that might be. What are some really practical things that people can do to overcome that and live more of a harmonious, peaceful life rather than let this stuff continue to affect them?
Yeah. There's three things. So H, P, and E. So the H stands for habits. I think you kind of hinted at it earlier in the conversation. I'm a big believer that, depression, anxiety, all of these things are very, very real. But if you don't practice productive or meaning-filled habits every day, you're not giving yourself a fighting chance. So for me, when I realized, this is a really bad trauma I've gone through, and this has really affected me. And I consider myself a really resilient person, a really positive person. I decided straight away, I'm going to take 4 months off work, and I'm just going to focus on meditation, exercise every day, being around like people who make me smile, reading books or listening to audiobooks, or just anything that makes me feel a bit good every single day, and talking to people. And those are my fundamentals every day. I imagine that those things, I imagined to myself that those were the things that were keeping me afloat in this ocean of chaos. So the first thing is, there are some universal habits, things like meditation, things like going for walks, things like talking to a trusted friend or advisor or whatever. Everyone knows that they're good for you. Just hold on to those things and be consistent, because if you don't do those things, you're creating unforced errors in a way, a bit like in a tennis match. Like if you're playing against the world number one, you're playing against like this big demon that is a breakup or trauma or whatever. You don't want to give away a foul straight away. You want to try and at least honor your game and be on and do what you can. So the first is habits. The second thing is, and I used to not say this because I didn't want it. It's a bit biased for me to say this as a life coach, but hire a professional life coach or therapist. And the reason that I say that isn't because, I'm interested in taking people's money. The reason I say it is because it just simply works. When you and I sat down and we did some coaching and we worked together, I'm working with a professional advisor who's helping me. I'm not chatting to my mom or my best friend. And the advice you get from those people, yes, they care about you, but they're not professionals. They're not specialists in this area. And that's one of the big things that I say to people. Because often, we do have this little bit of ego around, I can do it myself. I don't need to, I think there's a little bit of, particularly around like the more negative aspects of personal development, like a breakup or toxic relationship or whatever. I think sometimes we do shy away from working with professionals, but I'm a big believer. If I was Anthony Joshua and I just lost to Andy Ruiz and I'm feeling depressed and I need to work out, why did I lose that boxing match? I'm going to work with the best nutritionists and the best masseuses and the best, all of the specialists. If that's what Olympic athletes are doing, why can't we do that as everyday people? And these days, with things like BetterHelp and YouTube, there's so many resources available that you can get professional support virtually, even for a fairly low cost. Like, people do offer special rates if you're financially challenged, because I don't want to preach something that also some people can't access, but I really fundamentally believe just hire a professional and it will cut the healing time at least in half if they're any good. And then the last thing,
just quickly on that, I just want to say something on that as well. And again, coming from the same sort of place as you, I'm not saying it because I'm like, right, you got to come work with me, I want to make loads of money. It's not about that. What I think is, and you'll be surprised, I mean, look, not everybody does it, but I know I certainly do at times, will offer pro bono services for a limited amount of people for a limited amount of time, because I just want to be able to support those people. And yeah, we've got resources and various different things, but there's opportunities with people from time to time. But I think what you said about the talking thing, if you do find someone that is willing to just listen, great, and you can share that. But here's the thing: most people don't just listen. So what they do is they will share their opinion and project on you what they think. And that's where it can become detrimental. So you could do the admirable thing of going and saying, well, everyone says it's good to talk and share a problem shared is a problem halved and all that good stuff. You go and do that. You have the confidence to go and do that, which is vulnerable in itself. And then that person that you might share with, even though you've done everything in your power to try and make sure the right person, could just shut you down. Like, what are you doing? Man up. How long have we been hearing stuff like that? That kind of toxic. Come on, just man up, get on with it. And all of a sudden, then you can feel even worse and go, and then you end up in a spiral. Oh, well, I can't talk to anyone. And so that's the difference between when you're speaking with somebody. I'm not saying that everyone that you're going to speak to is going to say that. But that's where it can be dangerous, because they will start projecting on you their opinions. And why don't you just do this? Why don't you do that? And they don't have that level of understanding of being able to listen and take a viewpoint which a coach or therapist might, well, you'd like to think they would be taking.
Yeah. I think that's the power of someone who really honors your innate wisdom. The best therapists and coaches, as you know, Will, it's not about them as I'm not the I don't, sometimes, clients will ask me, what do you think? I'm like, I don't know. I'm just a guy sitting on the other end of the screen, but I've not lived your life. There's only one person who has lived it, and that's you. And you have all the resources within you. And that's what I love about working with a professional coach or a therapist or a mentor. If they do it the right way, is they give you that space to think for yourself without interruption, without judgment, without any agenda. And it's really a space for you to do like a brain dump, let everything out, and then sift through for yourself what you would like to do and what the lessons you want to take away.
And I want to add on this as well. And so for people that are listening to this and that haven't worked with a coach before or a therapist, is that a professional at appropriate level, they will be listening for what you want. And the reason I make that emphasis is because so many of us have had values injected or projected into us, whether it's social idealisms or whatever else that might be. So when we're saying things, I might, a person might say that's what they want, but what the likes of a professional will do is they will listen for language that is telltale signs that they're not actually what you think. Saying things like, I need to, I must, I should, so on and so forth. That they're indicative, they're indications that that's not actually what you truly think. It's what someone once said to you that you've then taken upon and adopted as a particular belief system. So even though you might say, oh, but I'm telling so-and-so what I think, but is it what you really think? And that's where a therapist or a well-trained coach will be able to call you out on.
Absolutely. And it's funny because the amount of times you can move away from this, but I hear, and I've done it myself, the same inherited goals that have been injected into people. Like, I want to make 6 figures. And then I'll ask people, well, 6 figures means 100,000, but it also means 999,909. Like, which one do you want? Because they're quite different as goals, but they might have heard an influencer or someone they admire talking about these generic, vague goals, and if it excites you, great, but is it truly yours? And it's so important. And I constantly ask myself this when it comes to even videos that I'm making, like, do I want to make this? Is this something that I'm making, or is it because I watched a video by a marketer and they told me that I should do this way, and I think that I'm going to get this result at the end of it? And it's easy to get caught in that trap. So yeah, I fully agree. And the third thing, the E, I was going to say, so got habits, work with a professional, which is a P, and E is education. Education, it does three things for me. It draws out what's within, it equalizes, so it levels the playing field, and it liberates you, it frees you from things that are holding you back. And one of the best things that I ever did, and I still do today, is just to learn. I don't mean like schooling yourself. I mean really educating and drawing out what's within you as a natural resource to understand it. So if you're going through a difficult time right now, maybe it is a trauma, maybe it isn't. I don't know. You're the expert. But by educating yourself, and language is a really, really powerful tool, and it's the first means that we have of creating signifiers of our world. In fact, there was a study done on this, because I do some nonprofit work with young people, and they did a study looking at young girls and boys and the language that they used to describe their emotions. And they were specifically looking at, over a period of time, what kind of words they used to express their emotions. And what they found was the boys versus the girls in this group, over time, the girls had exponentially more words to describe the emotions that they were feeling. So at the beginning, it was quite close, and then as time went on, they had more nuance in the female group. And what I often find is, when I'm working in schools, for example, young boys as old as like 16, 17, 18, even 25 plus, I've seen clients, they might only express their frustrations at, oh, it's long, man, meh, CBA, I'm vexing it. When I ask them, how do you feel about this, or if we're talking about, and imagine going through your life and you feel the emotion of apathy, but you don't have that word, so you can't describe the nuance of your experience to someone, and so you literally can't be heard. And in this study, the girls, they had far more expressions for this. And one of the things that I often use, if you just Google this, there's a wheel of emotion or of words you can use. So that you've got anger, but then there's subsets of anger. And one of the practices that I've been trying to do more and more is, when I'm having conversations and people asking just, how are you feeling, or how are you doing today, I try to use more specific words to label my experience, so that I can be understood much better and I can feel more connected. And that is a big part of education, is like, what do you feel? What are you going through? And, there's so many books out there on topics like grief, breakups, depression, anxiety. Study them, study yourself, so that you get to know, okay, what I'm going through isn't just a breakup. It's a breakup from a narcissistic, emotionally abusive relationship. Because there's two different things there. They're totally different experiences. And that's something that I think will further empower you to find your own, healing.
I couldn't agree more. What you've just said there about the emotional piece, I use the analogy with people, is that imagine walking out in your local park and all that you had were the prime colors, right? What would that, or for example, there was one shade of green. I know green, I don't think green's a prime color. It's a bad example, but there's only one shade of every color. So there's one brown, there's one blue, there's one green. What would that experience be like walking around in that park? Well, would it be very bland? It'd be very boring. But that's how most people are living their life when it comes to expressing their emotions, because there's 3,000 words to describe emotions, but most people use a few dozen at best. And and that's where they really, really struggle. But using the little nuances of words and saying sort of feeling good to great, or okay to incredible, you know, or even if you're feeling bad, rather than saying things like I'm feeling lonely to available, you know, and starting to make those tweaks you can completely change the experience that someone has, for sure.
Yeah, and you know, often just by naming what you feel, that can reduce the power of that feeling by 50%, because then you know, okay, this is what I'm feeling. And you can create your own strategies or whatever it might be that works for you to try and just mitigate that. But I think, and it's interesting because like I say, when I go into schools and I'm working with young boys who are feeling frustrated and unheard, but they only can articulate it with, nah, that's long, innit, bro? Like, can't be asked. Because they're not feeling heard by their teachers and by their friends and by their parents, they're increasingly getting more and more frustrated. And then they act out and misbehave in order to, you know, rebel against this feeling. And they don't see what is driving their actual behavior, because it's underneath. It's just they've been socialized not to express emotion. And, you know, that's where this whole thing about toxic masculinity comes in. So, habits, talk to professionals, and education.
Love that. Well, Keshav, thank you so much. It's been a fantastic conversation. Always love catching up with you. If people want to find out more about you, where can they go to do that? And there's one very obvious place, but I'll let you.
Without any ego, maybe there is a bit of ego in it. Just Google me, you'll find my stuff. But the best place is if you just go to email.keshavbhatt.com, you can join my weekly newsletter where I share like what I'm going through and things I'm thinking about, ideas I'm coming across. And then obviously you got my weekly YouTube videos that you can watch for free. I've got like 3 full free courses on confidence, productivity, procrastination on there. So yeah, go check them out and just enjoy.
Love that. What we'll do in the show notes, we'll put a link to your website and we'll put the link to your YouTube channel, so you can just head to the
Sounds good,
guys, and get to that. So thank you very much. Well, Keshav, again, thank you so much. It's been great to have you involved and have you on the Make It Happen with Will Polston podcast. And look forward to catching up very soon.
Sounds good, man. Thank you.
For those of you that listen, until next time, make it happen.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Make It Happen with Will Polston podcast. Make sure you join Will's free Facebook group, the Make It Happen community. Please support the show by subscribing on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or Google Play. Share this episode with at least one friend you think would benefit from it, and give Will a 5-star review wherever you download your podcasts. Until next time, make it happen.